Are you tired of all the voices who say, focus on the bottom line numbers?
Say whatever you have to, just close the sale.
Just get the credit card. It doesn't matter what you deliver.
You will never build a successful business until you grow a pair and stop caring so much.
Here, we respectfully disagree. We give you permission to embrace who you are, how much you care, and encourage you to design a business that works for you and your clients. Welcome to The Art of Giving a Damn, the podcast that proves with every single episode that you can create a profitable business doing what you're passionate about and making a positive difference in the world. Now here's your host, Michelle Schaefer.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of The Art of Giving a Damn. This episode's going to be a little bit different maybe than what you've seen or heard on the show before, and I think you're really going to find it fascinating as potentially a new tool that you can use to support your business growth and planning that you just may not have thought of yet. I want to welcome to the show VerDarLuz, who is the Practical Esoteric. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Michelle. It's exciting to be here.
Yeah. I am super excited to have this conversation. You and I met at an event, and you kind of blew me away with the way you've applied what you do. It's very different. And I've got your bio here. I'll read it in a second, but I thought I would start with a quote that you shared with me, J.P. Morgan. That quote is, "Millionaires don't use astrology, billionaires do." I found that fascinating.
I can say a couple things about that. There's some really interesting books on the history of astrology. If people are very skeptical or they've never thought about using it for their business purposes, there's a great book called The History of Astrology by Benson Bobrick. Mm-hmm. But there's many actually in it. It'll maybe not make you a believer, but it will definitely make you consider using this tool, because it's been used by everyone from, heads of finance like J.P. Morgan to, kings and queens throughout time. And the quote there, J.P. Morgan worked with an astrologer. Her name was Evangeline Adams, and she's known as one of the most famous astrologers of all time. She actually kind of predicted this earthquake in the early part of the century in New York. And she and astrology itself were put on trial for being a witch, because she predicted it.
Wow.
And the judge gave her like a case study and basically said, here's the chart of this person, tell me what happened. Like straight up. And she basically said that this person would die of this like fatal accident due to drowning or water of some kind. Mm-hmm. And it happened to be the son of the judge, and he died of drowning.
Wow.
And so the judge completely dismissed the case, said that astrology was legitimate, that this woman knew what she was talking about, and she became world famous at that point. She opened up a place in Carnegie Hall, and she ended up working with different royalty around the world. People like Joseph Campbell, when he was young, saw her, said that she was spot on later on in his life. And you had like a J.P. Morgan who was very skeptical early on, and then he went to her a number of times, and she consulted him about his business. And he said that, he really went by what she said and achieved a lot of his success due to those consultations. So, pretty fascinating, very interesting, intriguing stories of astrology in the 20th century.
That is really cool. And for those who may be listening and curious, I want to share there's two reasons really that I wanted to interview you on the podcast. The first one is I'm curious about this. I think a lot of us who were not raised to be aware of astrology or understand it at all, it's easy to look around and go, okay, I see the moon's effect on Earth. It affects the tides. It affects all sorts of cycles for people. And yet we kind of just assume it stops there. Like there's some kind of force field beyond the moon. Nothing else affects Earth. And, it was interesting to me to go, okay, I can literally see some of this, which tells me there's probably more there. So I'm curious about it. And then the second thing is you have created I think, really smart business niche for what you do with your skills. And that's something that I know a lot of my audience is going to be interested in. How do you take something like astrology and apply it to business in a way that you can build a profitable business that serves people with it? Because I know a lot of people who are on the more spiritual or esoteric side of things, they don't know how to turn it into a profitable business. And you deserve to be paid well for the skills and the gifts that you bring to the world. So that was the second reason. And I hope those of you who are listening, whether you are a believer, whether you're curious like I am, whether you're a total skeptic, stay tuned in, because I think you'll take things away from this episode that might surprise you. So let me read your bio here real quick. For those who don't know you, you go by the Practical Esoteric, and you've had some really interesting life events that have brought you to where you're at. We'll talk about it in a minute. But after your double lung collapse at the age of 17, you committed to seizing the day and taking a deep dive into life. You've traveled to over 40 countries. You've written 2 books, Codex of the Soul and Aquarius Dawns, and you're creator of the Divine Timing online school. You blend systems of self-awareness like astrology, human design, shamanic therapy into holistic life and business coaching, which is really fascinating, by the way. And you teach entrepreneurs, families, couples, and others how to really honor and integrate their core patterns and archetypes. And you empower your clients by helping them strategize, and I know we're going to talk about this, the when and where of life. So things like your power places and how to plan things in a way that work with what we've got going on around us instead of against it. You just started a podcast as well. So for those of you who are listening, you can find VerDarLuz under the Practical Esoteric on iTunes. You may want to pause, go subscribe, and come right back, listen to the rest of this episode. So, all right, that's the official bio. How did you get into doing what you do in business? How did you get started with it?
Well, the Mayan path kind of opened me up. I mean, it was travel and then studying the Mayan culture. So the first thing was I went to Asia when I was about 24, and I sold everything and just kind of done with the US. And I completed my bachelor's degree and just was like very interested in going to Asia and studying religions and being out there. And so when I was out there, I was super open because I was very empty, like I didn't have much. I was kind of seeking, and I ended up studying a lot of things like Qigong and Reiki, and I did Reiki courses and massage courses. And then I came into astrology in India, and I had a few readings, like a Vedic Indian reading. I had a Tibetan astrology reading. And then I met a woman who I was dating, and she read my Western chart, and I'd never had that chart done before. And I mean, I was always curious, I like sun sign columns. I thought they were cool, but I didn't really get into it that much. And when she talked to me about Mars and Venus, which in astrology represent the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine. So essentially, like the sign of the zodiac that your Mars is in has a lot to do with your drive and your passion and your masculine essence. And for men, it's something that really they want to be honored or acknowledged for. It's really different in the different signs. It's like a different version of a god inside of them. And women have that same idea with the version of the goddess, which is their Venus. And there's much more with that. But that little bit, once she explored mine with me, was a great epiphany, because I saw my relationship patterns very, very much spelled out. And so I was like, okay, I have to pay attention to this. And then, and every one of those readings I did out there, even though they were different systems, were very accurate, very resonant. So I came back home, and then I was really into the Mayan culture. There was this, prophecy with the 2012 end date of the Mayan calendar.
Right.
Maybe some listeners remember that. And I was really fascinated with that, as were a lot of people. So I started studying that calendar a lot. And through a lot of synchronicities, I ended up meeting a Mayan astrologer and a Western astrologer. She was both. And I started kind of mentoring with her. She read my Western chart. I really got blown away. And then I did a deeper workshop around the Mars and Venus, the god and the goddess. And at that point, I basically realized that this was a language that I had been speaking all my life, but I didn't know that I was speaking it. And now I had the vocabulary for it. So it was like Aries and Taurus, those words were expressing archetypes or primary patterns that we all have in us. And
Huh.
I realized that it was like laser pointed psychology. And so astrology could be applied to every area of life. That's what made it so appealing to me. Career, relationships, spirituality, family, home environment. And then I got really excited when I learned about locational astrology, that our charts can change depending on where we live, and then we can use that to strategize our best places around the world. So that's what I decided to niche in when I began my career around 12, 13 years ago.
Wow, that is really, first of all, it's fascinating, all of the different paths into it and all the different ways it applies. Um, so what made you decide specifically that you wanted to do this for a business?
Well, I knew that I wanted to dedicate my life to learning this language, which is what astrology, the word means language of the stars. So um, because it was a cross-cultural, universal ancient science. Every culture, the Mayans, the Egyptians,
Yeah.
everywhere, China, India, they've always had astrologers. And the more I learned about it, the more I loved it. So I knew that I was going to study it the rest of my life. I would never get bored. That was a main driving factor. And I could help people in very practical ways, like coaching, counseling. I was always drawn to psychology, but once I found astrology, it was very laser pointed, acute, very, one session could be like a year of therapy with somebody, because the symbols are so specific and accurate. So that then it became my business, because you kind of have to be an entrepreneur as an astrologer, because you have to market yourself, you have to teach here and there. And so that's what I started doing, and it just worked right away for me. So I kept going with it and wrote my books and taught courses and classes, and that's it. Yeah.
A couple of things you said there that I think are really cool. You said you knew you would never get bored with it. And I think that's both one of the reasons that a lot of us end up in business for ourselves is we're not cut out to go work in a cube and be in an office every day. We want to do something that we're not bored by, that's different, that's challenging, that's constantly, learning deeper layers in. But I think that's also, to me, a sign that you found what you're meant to do. When you find that thing that you get so excited about, this I can do for the rest of my life and I will love it. So that's really cool. So talk to me about the power place concept and how that works. Because I don't understand a whole lot about this. So you're going to have to explain it to me like a second grader. I know that you can read a chart based on where somebody was born, what was going on in the sky at the time. How does that change based on where they're located?
Well, that's one of the main questions every astrologer will ask you, your birth date, time, and place. And so what happens is, like, the place, if you were born in a different part of the world, what happens is it's like your chart rotates. And what this means is that it's like in astrology, we have 12 houses, and houses represent areas of life experience. Mm-hmm. What they actually are divisions of the sky. So they're a way that we divide the sky up. But those houses represent these realms of life, like career, like community, like psychology within us, or relationships. So 12 areas that kind of encompass everything. So when you move, essentially like one longitude zone to the next, one time zone to the next, and then also latitudinally. But whenever you move, you're rotating your chart. So essentially different planets and different signs of the zodiac will become more or less dominant forces in your life in certain areas of your life. So you might not have anything very strong or very dynamic in the area of career where you're living, but you might move one time zone away, and now you might put a planet up there, like let's say it's Uranus, and Uranus rules innovation and reinvention of ourselves and technology and paradigm shifts and startup energy. And so if you're in that field, then that can really serve you there, but if you want a very stable job where everything's the same every day, that Uranus energy in the area of career is not going to support that, because Uranus is all about the new and the change.
Okay.
So that's what we do, is we really look at first, what are your intentions? What are your priorities for a move? or a trip. It might be a trip you want to take. What are your intentions and priorities? And then we can see the best places to support that, you know, or if you know, hey, I really want to travel here, or I'm really drawn to live, you know, Southern California or the Northeast or wherever it is, then we can just look at what kinds of energies are most dominant there for you and how best can you work with that. Because every planet is like a character in us. And so when a character becomes very strong, a character will play out his or her story, which is in your birth chart reflected, at a different frequency. You know, you can be really conscious with it, or you can be kind of unconscious with it, and that's where you get into trouble with it.
Yes.
So my work is to translate the best or most conscious ways to work with those energies.
I love that, because I think that's one of the things that is fascinating to me about it is, you know, whether you believe 100% or not in some of these things, being aware of them is only a positive thing, because then you can at least take it into consideration and see what happens. Which, you know, here's one topic that I think has been a pretty hot topic lately, and maybe you can explain this one for me and for the audience. What's the deal with Mercury retrograde? Like, okay, I'm going to assume you believe it's a real thing, but like, what effect do events like that actually have on us? And does that shift based on where we live or our birth charts or when it happens?
Great question. So Mercury retrograde is one of the most commonly known of astrological cycles, and it's a really important one to pay attention to for most of us, because we live essentially in Mercury's world. What I mean is, Mercury in astrology rules communication, like the throat, expression, ideas, information. He was the god of trade, so he rules a lot to do with business, negotiations, contracts, travel. He was Hermes Mercury. You know, all these cars are named Mercury, all these, because he was the god of trade and travel. So what happens is all of those areas of life, the trade, the travel, the negotiations, the technology, when the planet goes retrograde, any planet goes retrograde, it's going in the like internal journey. It's something that it appears like it's going backwards from our position on the earth.
Right.
Even though it's not going backwards, but it appears that way. And we experience it psychologically that way. So what happens is, the areas of life ruled by Mercury, the trade, the travel, the tech, they have more challenge during that time. It's not like a forward movement. So what we typically see is the emails don't go through, the phone calls get dropped, the plane is delayed 5 hours or canceled, all of those things. And so we live in that world, right? We're all moving so constantly. We're on the internet all the time. So knowing when that cycle's coming in really helps you be A, more compassionate with yourself and others, B, giving you preparation or ways to plan for what to do and what not to do. Like with a Mercury retrograde, we always say to not sign a major contract during that time, because there's usually some missing essential piece of it. And so like you wouldn't buy real estate or sell real estate at that time. You wouldn't do a marriage ceremony. You wouldn't hire someone key in your business during that time. Or, you know, sometimes try to sell like, you know, major products or things like that. Launching a website you wouldn't do during that time. So, you know, there's many things that Mercury rules that this cycle I'm always tuning people into, because it's so practical. Second question that you had was, it does change depending on our charts. So like if it's essentially this, that like we just had Mercury retrograde, you know.
Yes.
Mostly,
very aware.
Yes. Well, do you want to mention one thing or two things that maybe you had challenge with?
You know, so it's funny because I think I shared this with you at the event when we had the conversation, that I used to think all of this was just, you know, craziness. And then I owned a website hosting company and I ran my own servers. And I started noticing these huge spike in support tickets for just like the craziest, how did that even happen type stuff that just made no sense. There was no logical explanation for some of it. And the, I don't know, third or fourth time it happened, I had one of my clients email me, like she sent in a support ticket and said, it's probably Mercury, but this just happened. And I started looking at it, I'm like, okay, well, we'll fix it. I'm like, what is she talking about? It's Mercury. So I asked, and she's like, well, do you know what Mercury retrograde was? I had no idea. And so I actually went back and referenced the times Mercury had been retrograde over the past 2 years with my support ticket numbers at my hosting company. And I was like, oh, that's what's happening, because I literally had visible, like measurable spikes in support tickets. And I was like, okay, whether I want to believe in this or not, I need to be aware of it, because like you said, then I can plan for it.
Yeah.
So like I can go, okay, during this period of time, I know I'm probably going to have a higher volume of tickets. I need to have extra staff available. You know, we just did a launch in the middle of this, and it was funny because I had backup upon backup upon backup option for things. I was like, okay, if this order form doesn't work, we have this one to fall back on. We have this one to fall back on. We have this other payment processor. We ended up using all of them because just strange things happened. I was like, no, we're ready for this. Because, you know, you can adjust certain things. You can't adjust everything. You can't just like totally stop being alive during the time, but it enables you to prepare for it. And if you don't end up using the backups, well, fantastic, but at least you knew and you had it in place. So yeah, my personal.
That's fascinating. I mean, that I've asked my hosting site people about that before too, because I know it's happening, you know.
Yep.
But yeah, two things. I mean, I had to travel during this cycle, and you know, I gave myself a lot of extra time, and then of course, plane was delayed, had to be rerouted. It was like the crazy like monsoons in California, you know, which like never happens. And during the day that Mercury changed position, which is always the most intense day. So when he's going retrograde, the day he changes, or when he's going direct. So that was like last Friday, I think.
Yes.
That was when this southwest plane basically had a hydroplane to a landing.
Oh, wow.
And so there was just, you know, and the storm was going across the whole state. It's really intense. So it's real, you know. And then in your own chart, like this retrograde was mostly in Sagittarius. So wherever house,
yes.
Is that your sun sign?
November 26th.
Oh, there you go. Well, so you would have been very affected by this retrograde because it went over your sun. Yeah. And so that would bring up some issues around your identity, how you're defining yourself, purpose in life, creativity, but it would affect you very strongly. Now, not everyone would experience that. So wherever Sagittarius is in your chart for this cycle would be the area that Mercury is saying, hey, put more mental focus here, reflect on this area, do some like reinterpretation, do some more planning around this, because this area needs some focused thought and attention right now. And that's really the best way of working with retrogrades, is to do more reflective process, do more integration, and reflect on the last 3 months, which is, he goes retrograde every 3 months. So you can look back, who did I meet? What contacts did I make? What did I learn? What new technologies did I integrate? How, you know, put it all together. Journaling is really good during this time. And then preparing is really good too, like for the next 3 months. Yeah. But making the big decisions, no.
Okay.
Yeah. And also being careful with our words, because the communications can go through quite a, you know, we say the wrong thing in the wrong way, and a lot of negative consequences come from that. So it's a good cycle to pay attention to.
Yeah. So I know that's just one of the things that like people tend to be familiar with that one because we hear about it, and we don't hear about, you know, all the other different events that happen on these 3 or 4 or 6 month, whatever the time frames are. So one of the things that you had shared with me when we had the last conversation was about this idea of kind of looking at your whole next year and kind of overlaying the here's what's going on astrologically, so that you can figure out what timing is most likely to support your goals. Talk to me a little bit about that. Like what's the process? How do you approach that?
Yeah, so there's a few ways. I mean, it's typical to see an astrologer at the beginning of the year, and you kind of can get a general forecast and get some ideas, but the work that I do is more detailed than that. It's more, I call it time mapping. And it's really more of a month by month strategy plan of, for instance, you know, there's a new moon every month. We know this. There's a full moon. Those cycles are landing in a certain area of your chart. So they're actually teaching you where to be putting intentions, where to be planting seeds, which is the new moon, And they're also showing you where you should be feeling more fulfillment or like illumination or growth, which is where the full moon is landing that month. So we can map that out every month for you. And it gives you like a way to harmonize with the cycles and to see if what you've been moving towards or evolving towards is going in the right direction. And if not, you can make some adjustments. That's only one of the cycles I work with, but that's one that's really strong. And every month, for instance, you might have a lot of energy in the area of the home that month, called the fourth house. But if you're really pushing your career a lot that month, you're really working against the natural cycles, and you're probably not going to feel a lot of success. But it's only because you're not following your natural rhythms. And so that's how it works. It's like, what are my rhythms each month, each year? How can I then launch my products and services or take a break or whatever it is at the right time so I'm in flow?
So I love that you mentioned that, because I think one of the things that I see happen, and a lot of people who work with entrepreneurs see, is we see people who are they're doing everything right. Like if you were just looking at a checklist, they checked off every box and the thing they were doing should have succeeded. And so often we look at that and we go, well, I'm a failure. I guess nobody actually wanted this, or I'm not good enough at it. When really, sometimes it's other things going on that we're not accounting for, and that we don't realize if we just are aware of it and can shift a few things, that same thing will work. Yep. So is that something you see with clients, like that kind of moment of realization of, oh, that's what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a really long-term coaching client right now I'm working with, and she's been going through a lot around relationships in her life. And we looked at this last Venus retrograde. Venus rules relationships. She was retrograde all of November, well, half of November and all of October. So relationship issues, value system issues were really up for a lot of us. And this was really hitting her chart very, very big time. We were able to do a lot of healing work for her around relationships with her father and her parents, and certain projections that were going, on in her life consistently. And so we gave a language for a way to really, practice with that and be more conscious with that. And she really had a lot of breakthrough from that experience, and then we're looking at, again, time mapping for her. And a lot of my clients, like, in my own life, I realized this early on when I studied astrology. You kind of see like, oh, this is how this works. You get the logic of it. And over the last 12 years, I've kind of structured every year so that I will launch like a product or a training, or I'll try to teach in person more, do workshops at the time of the year where I have the most energy in my area of career, because that's biggest visibility time of the year. So there's times where you'd be more invisible, or you should retreat, or you should take a break. There's other times where you should be networking a lot, or you should try to be very visible or promote something. And so I really tune myself and my clients into, which months will support what. And even if you want to drill down, if we do even deeper coaching, we can get into the days of the month that are going to be best for X, Y, and Z in your life, And if you have partners in your life, whether those are business partners or romantic partners, having that insight with each other, like each other's time cycles, it's really helpful for managing things or for planning things in your life, like vacations, or, if you work with someone, to understand where they're at in their cycles is super, super helpful.
Yeah. And that's, I think sometimes when we hear relationships or that kind of thing, we forget that applies not just to the home and family type, but so much to business. I've seen a lot of business relationships that maybe had they stopped to really examine if this was a good hire, or if the person was actually compatible with the goals for the business, it would have been approached differently and maybe saved themselves a lot of frustration. So I would imagine that's one thing that you probably have to go over with clients sometimes, is let's look at this before you create a situation that'll be tough to undo.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way that I help, especially entrepreneurs, is if you are going to hire someone, or if you have a team, if you can know before you hire, what you're looking for, we can look at charts and we can see like who's going to be best for the team, or if this person, how best to communicate to them, or how they may communicate. what kind of role that they would fulfill really best in the team, let's say. And the other system I work with a lot, human design, is really, really good for this, because human design reflects our genetic patterns. It works with the planets as well, but it talks about what genetic codons we have that are defined by the planets when we were born. It's very, very fascinating. And that gives us a certain energy type, and it gives us a certain way of making decisions in our life, and even certain energy centers that we make decisions from. And it's really different. So a lot of us are trying to do, kind of career where it doesn't really work with our natural genetics or with the archetypes in astrology that we have really dominant. So once you know, which signs are really strong in you, or which parts of you can really excel, you stop trying to do what other people are doing or do the conditioning, or, it's like you can go to a training or a summit and they might say, do your business like this, right? Do this first, and then this first, and this first, but it doesn't work for your energy type or for your archetypes, And that's why some people, they're best to not be on the stage, because they don't have that Leo energy very strong, or that Gemini energy very strong, or, they may not be best to promote themselves, but they got a lot of gifts.
Yeah.
And like in human design, there's a projector type. 20% of the population are projectors. They're not good at promoting themselves, but they're exquisite at being guides and managers of energy. So you need a projector on your team. You need to invite them to share their wisdom. But if you don't know they're around you, right, you're missing that insight. Or if you try to make them do all this kind of laborious type of work, that's not what their skill set is,
Yeah.
So, design is fascinating. I'm planning to do some teaching on that this winter about using design for business, because it's really a revolutionary tool.
It really is. There's so many different ways to like assess personality and all of that out there. But I think one of the things that, my clients sometimes in mastermind group, we get into these interesting discussions because just because two people ask the same question, I don't give the same answer. My answer and my suggestions to them are based on what I understand of who they are, what their gifts are, what they're actually going to be able to do. Because I get really frustrated with the cookie cutter systems of, if everybody follows this formula and takes these 3 steps, no, for a lot of us that doesn't work, right? Because we have, like you said, some people belong on stage, they're great, other people are good at other things, and when we try to fit everybody into this little cookie cutter system, so many people it doesn't work for. And really working with someone like you who understands how to support somebody based on who they really are, it makes such a difference in the results that people can get and what they're actually capable of.
Yeah, it's really validating, to be heard and to be seen that way. And I'm sure that that's feedback that you get from working with your clients, that you're not trying to fit them into some box, and that's what's so cool. Like, some people get skeptical of astrology or these tools because they think that it's going to limit them in some way, but it does the opposite. Because once you see a resonance of like, oh yeah, I have that pattern, then the better way of working with the pattern, or the way to take advantage or seize the opportunity with that pattern. So instead of limiting you, it really opens you up a lot. It gives you more vocabulary to work with, yourself. And it's like, the more you know yourself, the more you're going to know the best business model to have, and that's how I work with clients, is really like, okay, what do we want to achieve, in your life, in your business? What cycles are you in, and how can you take advantage of them? And then what model is going to work for your energy type, your archetypes, and then you just step into that, and you have a lot of confidence with that,
Right. Yeah, and you're right in saying it is really validating, because sometimes what you need is somebody to give you permission to actually just be who you are and be the best version of that, instead of trying to fit you into whatever the trendy system, for lack of a better phrase, at the time is.
Yeah.
You mentioned business model, and that's another thing that is really, I think a lot of people get stuck on, like, especially when they do spiritual type work or things that are a little more esoteric, is how do you fit that into a business model that actually works? So can you talk to us a little bit about what options you offer for clients? I know, you've got your coaching and your personal consultations. I also may have stumbled across your online courses and now own like 4 of them in the last 20 minutes.
Nice.
But, how to sell on a podcast. But I know you work with people in different ways. So what does the business model that you use that's working for you look like?
So my personal business model, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Well, it's a great question. And it's one of the reasons I like to help entrepreneurs, because I've realized how powerfully these tools have reflected a business model that can work for me. So some of this gets into the projector thing in human design. I am a projector. And one of the things I've learned is that, I'm not the best at marketing myself, at promoting myself. I'm better at bringing a lot of tools and being, developed and cultivated with those tools. And so what I've learned is I like to teach, and so I like to do these teleclasses here and there. I like to have these online courses that can live, in online marketplaces and things like that, where I don't have to do the promotions, like a Udemy or things like that. And then also, I guess it was about 5 years ago, I changed my business model to move out of doing mostly one-on-one consultations that were single consultations, because like a lot of people think, oh, I'll just go to an astrologer and 60 minutes, I'll have everything figured out.
Right. Give me a reading. It'll be the answer to all the questions.
Or they're like, yeah, I got a reading like 20 years ago. So I always hear that. I'm like, I kind of like wince, because what I realize is the more that you work with that tool or numerology or human design, these tools that I use, the more you are informed by them. So you're going to be educated the more and more you use them. So what I did was I started to study business and business coaching and how to work with people deeper, because I was frustrated not having the impact with clients. So I moved into a model where I created more packages where I was focused on the results of the client and then applied the tools to them, But, the thing is, and maybe I'm sure some of your listeners will struggle with the niche piece, because we all do. And that's been a big struggle for me, because my chart, I'm a Gemini rising, which, your rising sign is what you automatically, instinctually, impulsively do every day. Outer energy, and you can't not do your rising sign. It's a lot of like the outer mask or personality that we wear. Gemini rising is, attracted to learning and teaching and synthesizing all kinds of tools and concepts and ideas. That's my gift. But you tell a Gemini rising to try to niche and choose one thing, and they actually work against themselves, because my unique selling point is the synthesis of all of it. So even as an astrologer, I can talk to somebody and bring in something from their design or their numerology, because I have studied those very deeply too, but also business. I study a lot of, whereas a lot of astrologers don't know anything about business, but they know the language of astrology. So that's to get to the business model. Like, you can't fight your chart. You will always live those patterns. So the more you know about those, then you can create a model that works for you. So for me, I have different packages for different clients, and I do some customized packages too. But we usually get on a call and we look at, what are your challenges? What are your goals? Can any of the services I have really support you with that? And then I make an offer based off of that by really listening to where clients at. So that's really worked for me, instead of trying to be someone who's hunting down 60-minute clients that would take me forever to try to get to my business goals, that I could get to with a few clients who really want to do the deep work,
And I love that that's the business model you put in place, because one of the things that I work a lot with my own clients on is that how do you go from single session type things or hourly type things into a package? And the question I always ask, which you had this in your answer, was how can you be of the highest service to your clients? Like, dream situation. what would you actually bring to the table that you know would support that client? And it's almost always, well, one 30-minute or 60-minute session doesn't actually support them. It really just leaves them with some information that they're then on their own to apply that they don't fully understand.
Yeah.
And so the way that you put it into custom packages based on goals really is, I hope everybody is taking notes right now, that really is the way that they want to approach their business is, what's the goal that I'm helping my client get to? And what do I need to do to actually support that happening? Because it's almost never a single session. Let's just get on the phone for 30 minutes and then everything is magically fixed.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. It'd be nice if that was how it was, but it's not. And you know, the regularity, like in my work and I'm sure with you, it's like accountability is really big for people, you know, especially because we're so distracted these days, that to have someone you can really rely on who has no agenda but like your success, you know, and to give all their tools to help you be as successful as you can be. And so I think that coaching relationship is one of the most important relationships we can have in our life, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I've learned over the years is it's really valuable to work with different people in different areas as coaches, as accountability partners who can bring all these different pieces together and really give you the pieces that you need to succeed. So real quick, I know you've got a workshop coming up about planning 2019. Can you tell us a little bit about that and where people can go to find out more details?
Yeah. Well, I think you might have the URL in the show notes, I hope, because
Absolutely.
I think it'd be too long to tell people, but
Okay.
if they go to divinetimingcoaching.com, Divine Timing Coaching, and then you could put in Astrology Forecast 2019 in the search bar, but the URL would be, I think, hard for people on the call. But
we'll make sure it's in the notes, guys. If you're listening on iTunes, just open the show notes. If you are on YouTube, you'll see it right below the video. Wherever you're watching this, we'll make sure you've got a link.
That's going to be the deep dive into next year, all of the major cycles. So we'll look at like the Mercury retrogrades. I'll give you all the dates for them, what signs they're in, all of that. We'll go through some of the most transformational cycles of the year, which are the eclipses. And there's one right off the new year, January 6th. We start with the eclipses. They are the big evolutionary shifts of the year. So we'll talk about those. And then I'll get into the cycles with Jupiter and Sagittarius this year. Big year for you, Michelle. And then Saturn and Capricorn. We'll look even at basically how every sign will be affected by the cycles, whether that's your moon or sun or rising sign. And in that class, it's cool because there's some options for personal interpretations. So people can add on, like, where's Jupiter and Sagittarius in your chart this year, or where the eclipses are. So it's almost like a mini reading for people. And I always do that with my calls. So that's going to happen on Monday, the 17th. And even if people can't be live, it's all recorded, so they can get a copy of it. You just have to register and then leave your birth information, and then I'll send you what you sign up for. So it's a great head start, you know, for the new year.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will make sure we have a link to that in the show notes for everybody to check that out. And again, depending on when you hear this podcast, if it's already past the 17th, you can get access to the recordings so that you can still go through those and get a personal consultation on that if you would like to. Make sure you've got that link. And you heard the link to find out more. It's divinetimingcoaching.com. So one question I ask everybody on the podcast is, what is your favorite thing about what you do in business?
That my business is about helping people really connect with their soul and their soul purpose, and that we're really reflecting patterns in every area of life, from relationships to career to their home space to spiritual growth, and then reflecting the best ways of working with that for their evolution. And so I get to work directly with the soul of an individual, and to feel sort of a divine presence between us in the time that we're working together. And that's a very magical experience. There's a mystical connection there. And I take the role as an astrologer very seriously. I take it as a very high honor. And that's part of why I chose this career, because it was going to be able to meet people in a very spiritual place, but for all kinds of purposes, really. So that's why I love it.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today, for sharing how you got started, how you've turned this into a successful business for yourself over the years, and whether Mercury retrograde is real or not. That's, I think it'll be a hot topic. I can share that in the comments.
Yeah. I think you proved that one today, Michelle. So
oh my gosh, it was crazy. I overlaid the charts. I was like, okay, data. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate the fascinating conversation. And again, guys, make sure you stop by his website. It's divinetimingcoaching.com. Find out more. This may be a tool that you want to add to what you do in business, if it's a fit. If not, I hope you've taken away some ideas on how you can package your own services regardless of what you sell. You can put them together in a way that really is of higher service to your clients and allows you to design the business that you really want. So thanks again for tuning in today. Be sure you like, rate, review, subscribe wherever you are listening or watching, and I will see you on the next episode.